The moment Olivia Sinclair stepped onto the dusty main street of Leavenworth, Kansas in the spring of 1876, whispers followed her like shadows at sunset. Even the stagecoach driver had given her a wary glance when he'd learned her name. Sinclair girl, the cursed one. He'd muttered, before hastily making the sign of the cross and refusing to handle her trunk directly. Olivia kept her chin high as she made her way toward her aunt's boarding house, ignoring the stares that tracked her progress. At 25, she was considered well past her prime, but it wasn't her age that made her infamous throughout the Western territories. It was the 3 dead men who had made the fatal mistake of proposing to her. "Look at her walking around like she ain't carrying death in her petticoats," a woman whispered loudly as Olivia passed the general store. "Heard Caleb Winters was fit as a fiddle till he put that ring on her finger," another replied. 2 days later, trampled by his own horses. Olivia clutched her reticule tighter, her knuckles whitening. The stories always overlooked that poor Caleb had been drunk when he fell into the corral, or that Thomas Fletcher had been sickly long before he proposed, or that James Montgomery had been shot in a gambling dispute that had nothing to do with her. Facts mattered little when people had already decided she was cursed. The bell above the door to Magnolia's boarding house jingled as Olivia entered, and her Aunt Magnolia looked up from the front desk, her weathered face breaking into a wide smile. "Olivia, my dear girl." She hurried around the counter and embraced her niece tightly. "Let me look at you." She held Olivia at arm's length, her keen eyes taking in the fine quality of Olivia's traveling dress, now dusty from the journey. Still as beautiful as ever, despite what those fools back in St. Louis say. "Hello, Aunt Maggie," Olivia said, feeling a genuine smile form on her lips for the first time in months. "Thank you for letting me come." "Nonsense. This is your home now for as long as you want it. Your room's already upstairs." Magnolia nodded to a gangly boy who had appeared from the back. "Billy, take Miss Sinclair's trunk up to the blue room." As Billy struggled with her trunk, Olivia followed her aunt into the kitchen where the older woman poured them both cups of strong coffee. "Now," Magnolia said, settling into a chair, "tell me everything." Olivia sighed, cupping her hands around the warm mug. "After James was killed, his mother started telling everyone I'd hexed him, said I'd been seen gathering herbs in the woods by moonlight." She shook her head. "I was gathering chamomile for tea, Aunt Maggie, in broad daylight." "People see what they want to see," Magnolia said with a dismissive wave. "But that's behind you now. Here in Leavenworth you can start fresh." "The whispers have already started," Olivia said softly. "The stagecoach driver knew who I was." "Gossip travels fast, but it dies faster when there's nothing to feed it," Magnolia assured her. "You'll help me with the boarding house. Keep the books, help with meals, make sure the rooms stay tidy. People will see you're just a normal woman with extraordinarily bad luck." Olivia nodded, though she didn't share her aunt's optimism. 3 dead fiancés weren't something people forgot easily, especially when their deaths had occurred within weeks of their proposals. The pattern was too strange, too eerie for most to dismiss as coincidence. "There's a social at the church on Saturday," Magnolia continued. "You should come, meet some nice folks." "I don't think that's wise, Aunt Maggie," Olivia said, shaking her head. "People are already talking." "All the more reason to show your face," her aunt insisted. "Hide away and you confirm their suspicions. Show yourself as the sweet, normal girl you are, and the talk will die down eventually." Olivia wasn't convinced, but she knew her aunt meant well. "I'll think about it," she promised, though she had already decided she would avoid social gatherings for the foreseeable future. The last thing she needed was to meet another man who might decide she was worth the risk. That resolution lasted precisely 3 days. On her 3rd day in Leavenworth, Olivia was carrying a basket of fresh linens up the back stairs of the boarding house when she collided with a solid wall of man. The linens went flying, and she would have tumbled backward down the stairs if strong hands hadn't caught her arms. "Whoa there," a deep voice said. "Steady now." Olivia looked up into the most striking pair of blue eyes she'd ever seen. They belonged to a tall man with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. His dark blonde hair was slightly too long, brushing the collar of his chambray shirt, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. Despite his rough appearance, there was intelligence in those blue eyes and a kindness that made her breath catch. "I'm so sorry," she managed to say as he set her firmly on her feet. "I didn't see you." "My fault entirely," he said, releasing her to bend down and gather the scattered linens. "I was taking the stairs 2 at a time. Bad habit from growing up with 3 older brothers all trying to beat each other to supper." His smile was disarming, revealing a slight dimple in his right cheek. Olivia found herself smiling back before she remembered herself. This was exactly what she'd promised herself to avoid any interaction that might lead to something more. "Thank you," she said stiffly, taking the bundle of linens he held out to her. "If you'll excuse me." A flash of surprise crossed his face at her sudden coolness, but he stepped aside. "Of course, madam." Olivia hurried past him, feeling his gaze on her back as she continued up the stairs. She didn't look back. That evening, as she helped her aunt serve dinner to the boarders, she was dismayed to see the man from the stairway seated at the long table. He looked up as she entered with a tureen of beef stew, and that same disarming smile appeared. "Everyone," Magnolia announced. "This is my niece, Olivia Sinclair, who's come to help me run the place. Olivia, you know Mrs. Perkins and Mr. Goldman." She indicated the elderly woman and middle-aged schoolteacher who had been staying at the boarding house for years. "And this is our newest boarder, Mr. Daniel Quincy, just arrived from Colorado Territory." "Miss Sinclair and I had the pleasure of meeting on the stairs earlier," Daniel Quincy said, his eyes twinkling. "Though I didn't get her name at the time." Olivia nodded curtly and began ladling stew into bowls, trying to ignore the man's friendly gaze. She could feel Mrs. Perkins watching her closely, probably wondering if the rumors were true. "Mr. Quincy's opened a new livery stable over on Pine Street," Magnolia continued, apparently oblivious to Olivia's discomfort. "Finest horseflesh in 3 counties from what I hear." "You're too kind, Mrs. Abbott," Daniel said, "but I do pride myself on knowing good horses. Speaking of which, Miss Sinclair, if you ever need a mount, I'd be happy to find you one suited to your riding ability." "That's very kind, but I don't ride," Olivia replied, keeping her eyes on the stew she was serving. "Never?" Daniel asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "Out here, that's like saying you don't breathe." "I had an unfortunate experience as a child," Olivia said, which was only partly true. She had fallen from a pony at age 10, but her real reason for avoiding horses was the memory of Caleb Winter's broken body after his horses had trampled him. She'd never connected her presence to his accident, but others had been quick to do so. "Well, if you ever change your mind, I specialize in gentle mounts for nervous riders," Daniel said. "No pressure, of course." The meal continued with Daniel charming everyone at the table, telling stories of horse trading in Colorado and sharing news from the territories. Olivia remained quiet, answering only when directly addressed. As she cleared the dishes afterward, she overheard Mrs. Perkins' voice from the parlor. "Magnolia, you didn't tell me your niece was that Sinclair girl, the one they say is cursed." "Hush with that nonsense, Edith," her aunt replied firmly. "Olivia has had some terrible luck, that's all. 3 fiancés dead, that's not luck, that's a pattern," Mrs. Perkins insisted. "You should warn Mr. Quincy, he was looking at her all through dinner." "I will do no such thing," Magnolia said. "Daniel Quincy is a grown man who can make his own decisions, and my niece is a sweet girl who deserves a fresh start." Olivia set down the stack of plates she was carrying and quietly slipped out the back door, needing fresh air. The spring evening was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She leaned against the porch railing, breathing deeply, trying to calm the anxiety that had been her constant companion since James Montgomery's death 6 months earlier. She didn't believe she was cursed, not really. But 3 dead fiancés had made her wary of forming attachments. Even if the deaths were coincidental, the pain of loss was very real. She'd cared for each of those men, had planned futures with them. And each time, those futures had been violently ripped away. The back door creaked open and Olivia stiffened, expecting her aunt. Instead, Daniel Quincy stepped onto the porch, a pipe in hand. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Mrs. Abbott says this is the best spot for evening pipe smoking." Olivia hesitated, then nodded slightly. "It's a free country, Mr. Quincy," he chuckled as he packed tobacco into his pipe. "That it is, Miss Sinclair, though some might say you don't sound particularly pleased about my company." "I meant no offense," she said quickly. "I'm simply not accustomed to casual conversation with gentlemen." "Fair enough." He lit his pipe, the match briefly illuminating his features in the growing darkness. "We don't have to talk, we can just enjoy the evening." To Olivia's surprise, he kept his word, leaning against the railing a respectful distance away and smoking in companionable silence. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, and she found herself relaxing slightly. After several minutes, Daniel tapped his pipe against the railing to empty it. "Well, Miss Sinclair, thank you for sharing your porch and your evening air. I'll bid you good night." "Mr. Quincy," she called as he reached for the door handle. He turned, eyebrows raised expectantly. I should warn you that there are stories about me, unflattering ones." His expression didn't change. "I've heard a few whispers already." "And yet you're speaking to me," she said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Daniel's smile returned, gentler now. "Miss Sinclair, I've lived long enough to know that gossip is rarely the whole truth. Besides, I prefer to form my own opinions of people, even people who might be cursed." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Daniel stepped closer, his expression serious now. "Do you believe you're cursed, Miss Sinclair?" Olivia considered the question. "No," she said finally, "but 3 men have died shortly after proposing to me." "If not a curse, then it's at least a very troubling coincidence." "Life is full of troubling coincidences," Daniel said. "Doesn't mean there's anything supernatural about them." "You're very practical for a man who works with horses," Olivia observed. "Most horsemen I've known were full of superstitions." "Oh, I have my share," he admitted with a slight laugh. "Won't wear a hat inside, won't put my boots on a table, always mount from the left. But I draw the line at believing a beautiful woman can cause a man's death just by accepting his proposal." The compliment caught her off guard, and she was glad for the darkness that hid her blush. "Well, I appreciate your rational perspective, Mr. Quincy. But you should know that many in town won't share it." "Then they're fools," he said simply. "Good night, Miss Sinclair." As he disappeared into the house, Olivia remained on the porch, puzzled by Daniel Quincy's easy dismissal of the rumors that had followed her from St. Louis. Either he was uncommonly open-minded, or he hadn't heard the full extent of the stories. She suspected the latter and wondered how long his friendly attitude would last once he did. For the next week, Olivia did her best to avoid Daniel, though it proved difficult in the confines of the boarding house. Each morning, he greeted her cheerfully at breakfast, seemingly undeterred by her polite but distant responses. In the evenings, he often joined the other boarders in the parlor, where Olivia would serve coffee before retreating to the kitchen or her room. Despite her efforts to keep her distance, she found herself noticing things about him: the way he always thanked the kitchen staff by name, how he'd brought Mrs. Perkins a special cushion for her chair when he noticed her wincing from her rheumatism, the gentle way he spoke about the horses in his care. He was kind in an unassuming way that made it difficult to maintain her walls. On Saturday morning, Magnolia cornered Olivia in the linen closet. "You're coming to the church social with me this afternoon," she announced without preamble. "Aunt Maggie, we've discussed this," Olivia protested. "Yes, and I've given you a week to settle in," Magnolia countered, "but hiding away isn't helping anyone, least of all yourself. The whispers are getting worse because people only see you scurrying around like you've got something to hide." "I have nothing to hide," Olivia insisted. I just don't want to cause a scene. The only scene will be if you don't show up with me, Magnolia said firmly. I've already told everyone my beautiful niece will be helping me with the lemonade table. Olivia sighed, recognizing defeat. Fine, but don't expect me to socialize beyond pouring drinks. Magnolia patted her cheek. That's all I ask, dear. Wear that pretty blue dress of yours, it brings out your eyes. The church social was being held in the community hall behind the white clapboard Methodist church. When Olivia and Magnolia arrived, tables had been set up around the perimeter of the room, laden with cakes, pies, and other refreshments. A small group of musicians was tuning up in one corner, and children ran between the tables, excited by the prospect of sweets and games. As Olivia had feared, their entrance caused a noticeable hush in the conversations around them. Eyes followed their progress to the lemonade table, and whispers resumed immediately after they passed. Just ignore them, Magnolia murmured, squeezing Olivia's arm encouragingly. Easier said than done, Olivia thought, especially when she could clearly hear phrases like "all three dead" and "Black Widow" from nearby. She focused on arranging cups and making sure the lemonade was properly mixed, keeping her eyes down. Miss Sinclair. Olivia looked up to find Daniel Quincy standing before her table, hat in hand. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. "Mr. Quincy," she acknowledged, unable to prevent the small smile that came to her lips at the sight of him. "Lemonade, please," he said, holding out a cup. As she poured, he leaned closer and whispered, "You look like you're serving lemonade at gunpoint. Try to look like you're enjoying yourself." Despite herself, Olivia laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's watching closely," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with warmth that made her pulse quicken. A throat cleared behind Daniel, and he stepped aside to reveal Sheriff Willoughby, a barrel-chested man with a handlebar mustache and suspicious eyes. "Miss Sinclair," the sheriff said coolly, "welcome to Leavenworth. Your aunt says you plan to stay a while." "Yes, Sheriff," Olivia replied, pouring him a cup of lemonade with a steady hand. "I'm helping Aunt Magnolia with the boarding house." "I see." He took the lemonade without drinking it. "Just so we're clear, I keep a peaceful town here, don't much care for trouble or strange occurrences." Daniel's expression hardened. "Are you implying something, Sheriff?" "Not at all, Quincy," Willoughby said, though his eyes never left Olivia. "Just making sure our newest resident understands how things work in Leavenworth. I'm sure Miss Sinclair is well aware of your vigilance," Daniel said, his tone deceptively light. "As are we all." The sheriff's mustache twitched, but he merely nodded and moved away, taking his untouched lemonade with him. "You shouldn't have done that," Olivia said quietly. "Now he'll have his eye on you too." "Let him," Daniel replied with a shrug. "I've got nothing to hide." Before Olivia could respond, the music started up a lively reel that had couples quickly forming on the dance floor. To her horror, Daniel set down his cup and extended his hand to her. "Miss Sinclair, would you do me the honor?" "Mr. Quincy," she hissed, "have you not been listening to anything I've said? People think I'm cursed. And dancing with you will kill me." His blue eyes twinkled with mischief. "I'll take my chances." "Daniel," she said, using his first name without thinking, "please don't make a spectacle of us both." His expression softened at the use of his name. "Olivia," he replied in kind. "Hiding won't change what people think, but showing them you're just a normal woman who enjoys a dance might." Before she could protest further, her aunt appeared beside her. "Go on, Olivia. I can manage the lemonade. Have some fun for once." Trapped between them, Olivia reluctantly placed her hand in Daniel's, ignoring the widened eyes and whispers that followed them to the dance floor. As they took their positions, she noticed several couples edging away, creating a noticeable space around them. "Just look at me," Daniel said softly as the music swelled. "Forget everyone else." It was surprisingly easy to do as he suggested once they began moving. Daniel was an excellent dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps of the reel. His hand was warm and strong at her waist, his eyes never leaving hers as they circled and turned. For the first time in months, Olivia felt something other than anxiety or grief, a spark of genuine joy that made her cheeks flush and her lips curve into a natural smile. When the dance ended, there was a smattering of applause, and Olivia was startled to realize that other couples had gradually moved back onto the floor around them. Not everyone, certainly several matrons still watched from the sidelines with disapproving frowns, but enough that she didn't feel quite so isolated. "See," Daniel said as he escorted her back to the lemonade table. "The world didn't end and I'm still very much alive." "The dance just ended, Mr. Quincy," she replied, though her tone was teasing rather than fearful. "Give it time," he laughed, a rich, warm sound that made several heads turn their way. "I'll check in with you tomorrow to confirm my continued existence." The rest of the afternoon passed more pleasantly than Olivia had anticipated. Daniel stayed near the lemonade table, engaging her in conversation whenever there was a lull in customers. They discovered a shared love of literature. Olivia was surprised to learn that the rugged horseman had a dog-eared copy of the Iliad by his bedside, and a mutual dislike of the new railroad that was cutting through traditional grazing lands outside town. When it came time to leave, Daniel insisted on escorting Olivia and her aunt home, though the boarding house was only 3 blocks from the church. "It's still light out," Olivia protested. "We'll be perfectly fine." "Humor me," Daniel said. "My mother would haunt me from her grave if she knew I'd let 2 ladies walk home unaccompanied." As they walked, Magnolia deliberately slowed her pace, falling several steps behind them and striking up a conversation with Mrs. Perkins, who had joined their party. The obvious matchmaking made Olivia both embarrassed and secretly pleased. "Your aunt isn't particularly subtle," Daniel observed quietly. "No, subtlety has never been Aunt Maggie's strong suit," Olivia agreed with a small laugh. "I apologize if she's making you uncomfortable." "Not at all," he assured her, "though I am curious about something." "What's that?" "If you truly believed you were cursed, you wouldn't have danced with me today," Daniel said. "You would have refused more adamantly, perhaps even fled the social altogether to protect me and others." Olivia considered this. "I suppose that's true, so you don't really believe it," he concluded, "despite what you said on the porch that night." "I don't know what I believe anymore," Olivia admitted. "The rational part of me knows there's no such thing as curses, but 3 men died, Daniel. 3 good men who might still be alive if they'd never met me." "Or they might have died anyway," Daniel countered. "A drunk man falling into a horse corral, a sickly man succumbing to his illness, a gambler shot in a dispute, none of these are particularly unusual deaths in the West." Olivia stopped walking and turned to face him. "How do you know those details? I never told you how they died." Daniel had the grace to look sheepish. "I may have asked around a bit. After our conversation on the porch, I was curious. You investigated me." Olivia wasn't sure whether to be offended or impressed. "Not officially," he said quickly. "I just asked a few questions of people who might know the facts rather than just the gossip. My brother Owen is a lawman in Colorado. He taught me to look beyond rumors to find the truth." They had reached the boarding house steps. Behind them, Magnolia and Mrs. Perkins were still half a block away, engrossed in conversation. "And what truth did you find, Mr. Quincy?" Olivia asked quietly. Daniel's gaze was steady. "I found that you're a woman who's suffered terrible losses and been blamed for them unfairly. I found that despite that, you're still kind and thoughtful to others, even those who whisper behind your back. And I found—" He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I found that I'd very much like to get to know you better if you'd allow it." Olivia's heart raced, both thrilled and terrified by his words. "Daniel, you don't understand the risk. I've watched 3 men die after they showed interest in me." "4th time's the charm," he said with that disarming smile of his. "That's not funny," she said sharply. "This isn't a joke to me." His smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. I'm not joking, Olivia. I don't believe in curses, but I do believe in taking chances on things that matter. And I think you might matter very much. Before she could respond, Magnolia and Mrs. Perkins reached the steps, ending their private conversation. Daniel tipped his hat to all three women. Ladies, thank you for a delightful afternoon. I'll see you at breakfast tomorrow. As he walked away, Olivia couldn't help but watch him, torn between hope and fear. She'd sworn not to let another man get close enough to be hurt, but Daniel Quincy was making that resolution increasingly difficult to keep. Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued his gentle pursuit of Olivia. He never pushed too hard or made demands, but he was a constant, reassuring presence. He brought her wildflowers he'd found while exercising his horses, recommended books from his personal collection, and always sought her out for conversation. Gradually, the townspeople began to relax around her as well. When no disaster befell Daniel despite his obvious interest in her, the whispers became less frequent. Olivia found herself being included in invitations to quilting bees and church committee meetings. She was far from fully accepted, but the open hostility had largely faded to wary curiosity. One sunny morning in late May, Daniel appeared at breakfast looking particularly pleased with himself. "Miss Sinclair," he said as she poured his coffee, "I was hoping you might accompany me on a small excursion today." "What kind of excursion?" Olivia asked suspiciously. "A surprise," he replied, "but I promise it will be worth your while. Wear comfortable shoes and bring a bonnet for the sun." "Daniel, you know I don't like surprises," she said, though her curiosity was piqued. "Trust me," he said simply. And the thing was, she did trust him more than she'd trusted anyone in a very long time. So at 10 o'clock that morning, Olivia found herself walking beside Daniel toward his livery stable, wearing her most practical shoes and carrying a basket lunch that her aunt had insisted on preparing with a knowing smile. "Daniel, if this surprise involves horses, I should remind you that I don't ride," Olivia said as they approached the livery. "I remember," he assured her as he led her into the cool dimness of the stable, "but I have something to show you." In the last stall stood a beautiful chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. As they approached, the horse nickered softly and stretched her neck toward them. "This is Penny," Daniel said, stroking the mare's nose. "She came to me from a family heading west who couldn't afford to feed her anymore. Gentlest creature you'll ever meet." "She's beautiful," Olivia admitted, hesitantly reaching out to touch the horse's velvety muzzle. "And this," Daniel continued, moving to the next stall, "is her surprise." Inside was the tiniest foal Olivia had ever seen, all spindly legs and oversized ears, with the same chestnut coloring as its mother but with 4 white socks. "Oh," Olivia gasped in delight. "When did this happen?" "Last night," Daniel said, his face alight with the same wonder Olivia felt. "First foal born in my new stable. Thought you might like to help me name him." "Me?" Olivia was touched by the gesture. "I don't know anything about horses." "You don't need to know horses to name one," Daniel said. "Just needs to be something that fits him." Olivia studied the wobbly little creature who was now nursing from his mother. "What about Chance?" she suggested. "Since he's your first foal, hear your new beginning." Daniel's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Chance, I like that, very fitting." They spent the next hour with the horses, Daniel showing Olivia how to approach them safely, teaching her their behaviors and needs. Despite her initial wariness, Olivia found herself enchanted by the gentle mare and her inquisitive foal. "I thought we might have our lunch by the creek," Daniel suggested when they finally left the stable. "It's just a short walk, and there's a nice shady spot where we can watch the water." The creek was small but clear, burbling over smooth stones as it wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. Daniel spread a blanket on the grassy bank and helped Olivia settle on it before unpacking the lunch Magnolia had prepared: cold chicken, biscuits, apple preserves, and a small jar of lemonade. "This is lovely," Olivia said, looking around at the peaceful scene. "I didn't even know this place existed. Most townsfolk don't come out this far," Daniel explained. too busy with their daily concerns to notice what's right on their doorstep. They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the creek and the birds in the trees above them. Olivia felt more relaxed than she had in years, away from the prying eyes and whispers of town. "Can I ask you something personal?" Daniel said eventually, setting aside his empty plate. Olivia tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. Did you love them, your fiancés?" It wasn't the question she'd expected. Olivia looked down at her hands, considering her answer carefully. "I thought I did," she said finally. "Caleb was kind and steady. He made me feel safe when my parents died and I was suddenly alone in the world. Thomas was brilliant, a doctor with such compassion for his patients, and James." She paused, remembering, "James made me laugh. He saw the world as an adventure." "But," Daniel prompted gently, "but I think I loved the idea of them more than the men themselves," Olivia admitted. "I loved what they represented: security, respect, companionship. I was so afraid of being alone that I said yes each time without being truly certain." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's understandable. The world isn't kind to women without protectors." "No, it isn't," Olivia agreed. "But I've learned that saying yes to the wrong man, for whatever reason, doesn't end well, which is why I've decided not to say yes to anyone again." Daniel picked up a stone and skipped it across the creek. "What if the right man came along? Would you deny yourself happiness out of fear?" "It's not just fear for myself," Olivia explained. "It's fear for him too. Even if I don't believe in the curse, I can't ignore the pattern." "Patterns can be broken," Daniel said, skipping another stone. This one bounced 5 times before sinking. "Sometimes all it takes is one exception to disprove a rule." Olivia plucked a blade of grass and twirled it between her fingers. "And you think you're that exception?" Daniel turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "I think I'd like the chance to find out." The directness of his gaze made her breath catch. "Daniel," whatever she had been about to say was cut off by the distant sound of hoofbeats. A moment later, a rider appeared on the path by the creek, pushing his horse hard. It was Billy, the boy who helped at the boarding house. "Mr. Quincy," he called, reining in his lathered horse. "Miss Sinclair, you got to come quick. There's a fire at the livery stable." Daniel was on his feet instantly. "Get back to town," he ordered Billy. "Tell Sheriff Willoughby to organize a bucket brigade. We'll be right behind you." As Billy galloped off, Daniel helped Olivia to her feet, his face grim. "I'm sorry, but we need to hurry." They ran most of the way back to town, Daniel's longer legs slowing to match Olivia's pace. By the time they reached the main street, they could see smoke rising from the direction of the livery stable. A crowd had already gathered, passing buckets of water from the town pump to the burning building. "Penny and Chance," Olivia gasped, remembering the mare and foal. Daniel's face was set in determined lines. "The fire looks to be in the feed room. The horses should still be safe, but not for long if the flames spread." Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the stable, ignoring the shouts of warning from Sheriff Willoughby and the other men fighting the fire. "Quincy, you fool," the sheriff bellowed. "The roof's about to go." Olivia watched in horror as Daniel disappeared into the smoke-filled building. The minutes that followed were the longest of her life as she stood helplessly among the crowd, scanning the stable entrance for any sign of movement. Finally, Daniel emerged, leading Penny with one hand while carrying the tiny foal in his other arm. The crowd cheered as he guided them to safety, but their jubilation was short-lived. As Daniel handed the foal to a stable boy, a terrible cracking sound came from the burning building. The roof. Someone shouted, "It's coming down!" Daniel turned to look just as a flaming beam crashed through the stable entrance, sending burning debris flying. One large piece struck him on the head, and he crumpled to the ground like a marionette with cut strings. "Daniel!" Olivia screamed, pushing through the crowd to reach him. She fell to her knees beside his still form, heedless of the burning embers all around them. Blood trickled from a gash on his temple, and his face was smeared with soot, but he was breathing. With help from Sheriff Willoughby and another man, Olivia managed to drag Daniel away from the collapsing building. As they reached safety, the entire roof of the stable caved in with a deafening roar, sending a plume of sparks and smoke into the sky. "Get him to Doc Wallace," the sheriff ordered, and together they carried Daniel's unconscious form to the doctor's office across town. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Wallace cleaned and stitched the wound on Daniel's head while Olivia hovered anxiously nearby, refusing to leave despite the doctor's assurances that he would send word when there was news. "He took quite a blow," Doc Wallace explained as he worked. "There's no telling when he'll wake up or what state he'll be in when he does." "What do you mean, what state?" Olivia asked, her voice tight with fear. "Head injuries can be unpredictable," the doctor said. "He might wake up just fine, or he might have problems with his memory, his speech, his coordination. We won't know until he opens his eyes." Olivia sank into a chair beside Daniel's bed, taking his limp hand in hers. "This is my fault," she whispered. "The curse, now stop that nonsense right there," Doc Wallace interrupted firmly. "I've known Daniel Quincy since he was knee-high to a grasshopper, and he's always been the first one to run into danger if someone needed help. This isn't any curse, it's just who he is." But Olivia couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. Once again, a man who cared for her was lying injured, possibly dying. The pattern was repeating itself before her eyes. As night fell, Doc Wallace set up a cot for Olivia, recognizing that she wouldn't leave Daniel's side. She dozed fitfully, waking at every small sound, hoping it meant Daniel was stirring. But he remained unconscious, his breathing steady but his eyes firmly closed. By morning, news of Daniel's injury and the destruction of his livery stable had spread throughout Leavenworth. Visitors began arriving, men who had boarded their horses with him, women who had purchased gentle mounts for their children, even Sheriff Willoughby, who awkwardly offered his assistance in rebuilding once Daniel recovered. "We caught the boy who started the fire," the sheriff informed Olivia. "Tommy Jenkins, 13 years old, smoking a cigarette in the hayloft. Says he dropped it by accident, but the damage is done either way." "The horses?" Olivia asked, remembering the other animals besides Penny and Chance. "All accounted for," the sheriff assured her. Quincy had taught his stable hands well. They got most of the horses out before he even arrived. Just that new mare and her foal were left because they were in the back stall away from the main stable. Relief washed over Olivia at this news. At least Daniel's beloved animals were safe, though his business was now in ashes. Around midday, Magnolia arrived with fresh clothes for Olivia and a basket of food. "You need to keep up your strength," her aunt insisted. "Daniel will need you when he wakes up." "If he wakes up," Olivia said, her voice hollow with exhaustion and worry. "When?" Magnolia repeated firmly. "That boy's too stubborn to let a bump on the head keep him down for long." As if on cue, Daniel's fingers twitched in Olivia's grasp. She gasped, leaning forward to study his face. "Daniel, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. For a terrifying moment, his gaze seemed unfocused, staring blankly at the ceiling. Then his eyes shifted to Olivia's face and recognition dawned in them. "Olivia," he croaked, his voice rough from smoke and disuse. "Are you all right?" A half-laugh, half-sob escaped her. "Am I all right? You're the one who ran into a burning building and got hit by a falling beam." "Penny and Chance?" he asked, trying to sit up before wincing in pain. "They're fine," Olivia assured him, gently pressing him back against the pillows. "All the horses are safe, it's just the stable that's gone." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, relief evident on his face. "Good, that's good." Doc Wallace appeared, summoned by Magnolia, and began examining Daniel, checking his pupils and asking him simple questions to test his mental faculties. "Well, Mr. Quincy, it seems your hard head has served you well this time," the doctor concluded. "You've got a nasty concussion and that cut will leave a scar, but I don't see any signs of permanent damage." "How long until I can get back to work?" Daniel asked. "Work? You don't have a stable to work in, young man," Doc Wallace reminded him. But as for physical activity, I want you resting for at least a week. No exertion, no excitement, and absolutely no running into any more burning buildings." After the doctor left, Magnolia tactfully excused herself, promising to return later with supper. Alone with Daniel, Olivia found herself suddenly shy, aware of how she must look after a night without sleep, and how forward she'd been in refusing to leave his side. "You stayed with me all night," Daniel said, his voice soft with wonder. "I was worried," Olivia admitted. I thought it was happening again." Daniel's brow furrowed. "The curse, you mean?" Olivia nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "3 dead fiancés, and now you, injured right after telling me you wanted a chance with me. It's hard not to see a pattern." "Olivia, look at me," Daniel said, waiting until she raised her eyes to his. "I'm not dead, not even close, and I'm certainly not your fiancé." "Yet," she said without thinking, then immediately clapped a hand over her mouth, mortified. Daniel's eyes widened, and then he began to laugh, though it quickly turned into a grimace of pain as the movement jarred his injured head. "Well, that's certainly getting ahead of ourselves, Miss Sinclair, but I'm glad to know you've at least considered the possibility." Olivia felt her cheeks burning. "I didn't mean, that is, I was just pointing out." "Olivia," Daniel said, reaching for her hand, "I'm teasing you, but I meant what I said yesterday. I'd like a chance whatever form that takes." Olivia looked down at their entwined hands. "Your stable is gone because of me." "My stable is gone because a foolish boy was smoking where he shouldn't have been," Daniel corrected her. "And it can be rebuilt. I have some savings and the townspeople seem willing to help." "But what if something worse happens next time?" Olivia pressed. "I couldn't bear it if you were seriously hurt or worse because of me." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Life comes with no guarantees for any of us. I could get thrown from a horse tomorrow, or struck by lightning, or bitten by a rattlesnake, all without any help from your supposed curse. I'd rather spend whatever time I have happy with you than safe without you." The sincerity in his eyes made Olivia's resolve waver. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that maybe, just maybe, the pattern could be broken. "How about this?" Daniel suggested. "Give me 1 month. Let me court you properly, no proposals, no commitments, just 2 people getting to know each other better. If I'm still alive and well after 30 days, we'll talk about what comes next." It was such a practical approach to an irrational fear that Olivia couldn't help but smile. 1 month, she agreed finally, "but at the first sign of disaster, I'm calling it off." "Deal," Daniel said, his answering smile lighting up his tired face. "Though I should warn you, I'm remarkably disaster-resistant." Over the next few weeks, as Daniel recovered from his injuries, Olivia found herself slowly letting down her guard. True to his word, Daniel courted her with patience and humor. Once Doc Wallace cleared him for normal activities. They took walks along the creek where they'd had their picnic, attended church together on Sundays, and spent evenings on the boarding house porch, talking until the stars came out. The townspeople's attitudes continued to shift as they watched the courtship unfold without incident. The story of how Olivia had refused to leave Daniel's side after the fire had spread quickly, challenging the narrative of her as a cold-hearted harbinger of death. The nickname Cursed Sinclair was gradually replaced by her actual name in conversations around town. As for Daniel, he threw himself into rebuilding his livery stable with help from the community. Men who had horses boarded with him volunteered their time and skills, and even Sheriff Willoughby could be seen hauling lumber on his days off. Olivia helped too, bringing food for the workers and keeping track of expenses and materials in a neat ledger. "You have quite a head for figures," Daniel observed one evening as they reviewed the accounts together on the boarding house porch. "My father was a banker," Olivia explained. "He insisted I learn basic bookkeeping, saying a woman should always be able to manage her own affairs." "A wise man," Daniel said. "Would you consider managing the livery's books once we reopen? I'm afraid my method of tracking expenses involves scraps of paper stuffed in my pockets, which then go through the wash." Olivia laughed, delighted by the offer. "I'd be happy to help." Though I hope you're paying me a fair wage, Mr. Quincy. I don't work for compliments alone. 10% of the profits, Daniel said promptly, and my eternal gratitude, of course. Make it 15% and you have a deal, Olivia countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Daniel grinned. 15 it is. I should have known better than to negotiate with a banker's daughter. As the end of the 30 days approached, Olivia found herself both anticipating and dreading the deadline. Against all expectations, nothing terrible had happened to Daniel. There had been minor mishaps. Of course, a nail through his boot that missed his foot by an inch, a skittish horse that nearly kicked him, but nothing that could be attributed to anything other than the normal risks of his profession. More significantly, Olivia had realized something over the past month. She was falling in love with Daniel Quincy. Not with what he represented or what he could provide, but with the man himself, his kindness, his humor, his unwavering belief in her. For the first time, she understood what had been missing in her previous engagements. On the 30th day, Daniel asked Olivia to meet him at the newly rebuilt livery stable after supper. The structure was complete, though some of the interior fixtures were still being installed. When she arrived, she found the stable lit with lanterns, casting a warm glow over the fresh-cut lumber. Daniel was waiting by Penny's stall, the mare contentedly munching hay, while little Chance, now steadier on his legs, dozed in the corner. "Well, Miss Sinclair," Daniel said as she approached, "it's been exactly 30 days since our agreement. As you can see, I'm still very much alive and well." "So you are," Olivia acknowledged, smiling despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "Quite disappointingly disaster-free, in fact." "Told you I was resistant," he said with a wink. He gestured around the stable. "What do you think of the place? Grand reopening is set for Monday." "It's wonderful," Olivia said honestly, running her hand along the smooth wooden post of a stall, "even better than before." "I think so too," Daniel agreed, "and I have you to thank for much of it. Your bookkeeping saved us from going over budget, and your lemonade kept the workers from collapsing in the heat." "Happy to help," Olivia said, "though I'm not sure the lemonade deserves quite that much credit." Daniel laughed, then grew serious. "Olivia, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Daniel, if this is about our agreement, it is," he confirmed, taking her hands in his. "You said we'd talk about what comes next after 30 days. Well, here we are." "Here we are," Olivia echoed softly. "I've spent this month getting to know you better," Daniel continued, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "And everything I've learned has only confirmed what I suspected from the start, that you're remarkable. Strong, intelligent, kind, despite everything you've been through." Olivia felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words. "Daniel, please let me finish," he said. "I know you're afraid of what might happen if we continue on this path. I know the past weighs heavily on you. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility that the pattern is already broken. 30 days, Olivia. No disasters, no near-death experiences, just two people discovering they might be perfect for each other." "It's not that simple," Olivia protested, though her resolve was weakening. 30 days isn't that long. "Then give me 30 more," Daniel suggested. "And 30 after that, as many sets of 30 as you need to feel sure. I'm a patient man, Olivia Sinclair." Olivia looked into his earnest blue eyes and felt the last of her resistance crumbling. "What if I don't want to wait anymore?" she whispered. Daniel's expression changed to one of hopeful disbelief. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think you're right," Olivia said, gaining confidence as she spoke. "The pattern is broken, you've shown me that. And I don't want to waste any more time being afraid of happiness when it's standing right in front of me." The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise. "Olivia Sinclair, are you giving me permission to court you without a 30-day expiration date?" "I'm giving you permission to do a lot more than that, Daniel Quincy," she replied, stepping closer to him. "If you're willing to take the risk." "Fourth time's the charm," he murmured, echoing his words from weeks ago, but this time there was no joke in them, only certainty. Then he was kissing her, his arms encircling her waist as hers wound around his neck. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Olivia responded with all the feeling she'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I should warn you," Daniel said, resting his forehead against hers, "I'm not planning to stop at courting. Not in the long run." "I should hope not," Olivia replied with more boldness than she'd ever felt. "I've waited quite long enough for the right man to come along." Over the next few months, Olivia and Daniel's courtship became the talk of Leavenworth, but for entirely different reasons than the whispers that had followed her arrival. The story of the cursed woman and the cowboy who refused to believe in bad luck captured the town's imagination, transforming from a tale of superstition to one of romance. The livery stable prospered under their combined efforts. Daniel's expertise with horses and Olivia's head for business proved to be a winning combination. They established a reputation for fair dealings and quality stock that drew customers from surrounding towns and even passing travelers heading west. By Christmas, 6 months after the fire, Daniel had saved enough to purchase a small piece of land just outside town, with plans to build a house in the spring. On Christmas Eve, as they walked home from the church service through gently falling snow, he led Olivia on a detour past the property. "I've been thinking about the layout," he said as they stood looking at the snow-covered ground that would someday hold their home. "A big front porch for summer evenings, a fireplace in the parlor for winter nights, maybe 3 bedrooms to start with." "3?" Olivia asked, raising an eyebrow. "That's quite ambitious for 2 people." Daniel's eyes twinkled in the moonlight. "I like to plan ahead." When they reached the boarding house, Daniel pulled Olivia into the shadows of the porch, away from the windows where curious eyes might be watching. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "I was going to wait until tomorrow with the other presents, but I find I can't wait another minute." He withdrew a small velvet box and dropped to one knee on the snowy porch. Olivia's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a ring with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Olivia Sinclair," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the cold and the momentousness of the moment. "I've loved you since the day you collided with me on the stairs and looked at me like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not fear. The old anxiety flickered briefly the memory of 3 proposals that had ended in tragedy, but it was quickly washed away by the certainty she felt looking into Daniel's face. "Yes," she said, her voice clear in the still night. "Yes, I will marry you, Daniel Quincy." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, snow falling gently around them, Olivia knew without a doubt that this time would be different. The curse, if it had ever existed, was broken. They were married on a bright spring day in April 1877, almost exactly a year after Olivia had arrived in Leavenworth. The entire town turned out for the wedding, eager to witness the culmination of a romance that had captured their collective imagination, even Mrs. Perkins, who had been one of the most vociferous spreaders of the curse rumors, had come around, declaring that true love conquers all, even bad luck. She presented the couple with a hand-stitched quilt that she claimed had brought her family good fortune for generations. As Olivia walked down the aisle of the Methodist church on Sheriff Willoughby's arm, the sheriff having appointed himself as her surrogate father for the occasion, she caught whispers from the congregation not of fear or superstition, but of admiration. "Never seen a more beautiful bride," someone murmured. "That Quincy's a lucky man," said another. "4th time's the charm," a familiar voice said clearly. Aunt Magnolia, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief as Olivia passed her pew. Daniel waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving Olivia as she approached. When she reached him and the sheriff placed her hand in his, Daniel leaned close and whispered, "Not a bit nervous?" "Not even slightly," Olivia whispered back, and it was true. The fear that had haunted her for so long was gone, replaced by a certainty that felt like coming home. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the town square. where tables had been set up and loaded with food contributed by nearly every household in Leavenworth. There was dancing and music, speeches and toasts, and more good wishes than Olivia could have imagined receiving a year earlier. As the sun began to set, Daniel led his new wife away from the festivities toward the livery stable. Inside, a wagon stood packed and ready, hitched to two of Daniel's finest horses. "What's this?" Olivia asked, though she had a pretty good idea. "Our carriage awaits, Mrs. Quincy," Daniel said, lifting her into the wagon with ease. "I thought we might want to spend our wedding night somewhere other than your aunt's boarding house with thin walls and nosy neighbors." Olivia laughed, delighted by his thoughtfulness. "Where are we going?" "Not far," he assured her. "Just to our land. I've set up a tent, a proper one with a real bed and all the comforts. I thought we might spend our first night together under the stars, on the ground that will hold our home." It was the most romantic gesture Olivia could imagine. "It sounds perfect." They drove out of town as dusk deepened into night, following the road that led to their property. Daniel had indeed set up a spacious canvas tent, furnished with a real bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and even a portable stove for warmth. Lanterns cast a golden glow over everything, and a bottle of champagne chilled in a bucket. "When did you do all this?" Olivia asked in amazement as Daniel helped her down from the wagon. "I had some help," Daniel admitted. "Your aunt and half the ladies in town have been conspiring with me for weeks. They're quite invested in our happiness, it seems." Later, as they lay together in the comfortable bed, Olivia's head resting on Daniel's chest while he stroked her hair, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the fear and isolation she'd felt upon arriving in Leavenworth to the joy and belonging she felt now, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked softly, his fingers still playing with her hair. "About how lucky I am," Olivia replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. "A year ago I thought I was cursed, now I know I'm blessed." Daniel tightened his arms around her. "Fourth time's the charm," he murmured sleepily. "I told you so." Olivia smiled in the darkness. "So you did, Mr. Quincy." "So you did." In the years that followed, Olivia and Daniel built a life together that exceeded both their expectations. Their house on the outskirts of Leavenworth became a home filled with love and, eventually, the laughter of children. First a son, Owen, named after Daniel's lawman brother, and 2 years later, twin daughters, Margaret and Eleanor. The livery stable continued to thrive under their joint management, with Olivia's financial acumen allowing them to expand into breeding horses specifically for families heading west. Their reputation for matching the right horse to the right rider became legendary across Kansas and beyond. Little Chance, the foal born on the day Daniel had first declared his interest in Olivia, grew into a magnificent stallion whose offspring were highly sought after. Penny remained Olivia's favorite, however, and under Daniel's patient teaching, she eventually overcame her fear of riding enough to take gentle rides around their property with Daniel at her side. The curse that had once defined Olivia became nothing more than an old story, occasionally brought up by newcomers who had heard whispers, only to be dismissed with laughter by those who knew better. In time, even Olivia could join in the amusement, secure in the knowledge that superstition had no power over the happiness she and Daniel had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play with the newest litter of puppies from their old hound dog Blue, Daniel took Olivia's hand and raised it to his lips. 10 years, he said, his eyes still as blue and warm as the day they'd met. "And not a single disaster has befallen me. I'd say that thoroughly disproves the curse theory, wouldn't you?" Olivia leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "I stopped believing in that curse the day you ran into a burning building and lived to tell about it," she confessed. "But I'm grateful for every day you've given me since." "As am I," Daniel replied, his arm tightening around her shoulders as they watched the sun setting over the land they'd made their own. Fourth time was indeed the charm, my love. And I intend to keep charming you for the next 50 years at least. Olivia turned her face up to his for a kiss, as much in love with this steadfast man as she had been on their wedding day. I'm counting on it, Mr. Quincy. I'm counting on it. And as twilight fell over Leavenworth, the woman once labeled cursed rested safely in the arms of the cowboy, who had refused to believe in anything but love, their future stretching before them as bright and promising as the first stars appearing in the evening sky.